Representative Edcel Lagman from the 4th District of Quezon City. 1st District of Albay is hereby recognized.
Madam Speaker and distinguished colleagues, this is more than a privileged speech. This is a contra-SONA. The authentic opposition's contra-SONA has been institutionalized, like the president's SONA. As its appellation suggests, it is a rebuttal to the president's SONA. It presents to the people the unalloyed state of the nation, devoid of aggrandizement, hyperbole, and pretense. It is a critique of the president's declarations, misdeclarations, and non-declarations. Before I proceed, I would like to congratulate Minority Leader Carabs Paduano for his critical assessment of the President's last SONA and the President's errant policies. Let me start with the state of the economy. Past presidents in their final SONAs invariably underscored the improvement of the economy, even its robust state. Now, even a cursory look at the economy reveals its precariousness. Obviously, President Duterte did not confirm this. However, the following negative indicators show what aids the economy. 1. Decelerating gross domestic product. Even before the pandemic, the GDP was steadily falling from 7.1% in 2016 to 6.9% in 2017, 6.3% in 2018, and 6.1% in 2019. The GDP plummeted to negative 9.5% in 2020, the lowest ever, including the martial law years of the late President Marcos. For the economy to be brought back to the 2019 level, it must grow by at least 10.5% this year. Government economic managers themselves, however, target a growth of only 6 to 7%. The IMF downgraded its forecast from 6.9 to 5.9%. The ADB forecast a lower growth at 4.5%. Number 2, runaway unemployment. The all-time highest unemployment rate was at 17.7% in April 2020 at the onset of the pandemic. A record 7.3 million Filipinos were jobless. The annual unemployment rate improved to 10.3% in 2020, but still higher than the 5.1% in 2019. The government has tried to help households with its cash assistance program. But aside from the reported irregularities and delays in cash distribution, the amount of the cash assistance was too modest to approximate adequate relief. Besides, the policy of dole-outs is unsound in the long run. 3. Increasing poverty and hunger. The World Bank estimates poverty incidence to be 19.8% in 2020 and projects 18.7% in 2021. NEDA approximates poverty incidence in 2021 from 15.5 to 17.5%. The June 2021 SWS survey showed that 48% of families considered themselves poor, with even higher results in Visayas and Mindanao. The hunger surveys of SWS are more revealing, where 16.8% of those surveyed confess they experienced hunger at least once in the past 3 months. The worst result was in Mindanao at 20.7%. The pre-pandemic figures were double in the pandemic months. There were roughly 2 million more hungry Filipino families in 2020 than in 2019. The same figure is estimated by the World Bank. Number 4, galloping inflation. In the first quarter of 2021, the inflation rate was 4.5%, compared to only 2.6% for the whole of 2020. It overshot the Bangko Central's self-imposed upper limit of 4%. It is worrisome that inflation rates for essential goods were even higher than the overall high of 4.5%. Food inflation was 6.6%. Vegetable inflation was 15.5%, and meat inflation was 19.6%. Number 5, ballooning national debt. A disconcerting area is the size of the national debt. From 5.948 trillion in June 2016, the last month of the Aquino administration, the national debt rose to 7.731 trillion in 2019 and to 9.795 trillion in 2020. In 1 year, the national debt increased by more than 2 trillion. And in May 2021, the national debt stood at 11.071 trillion. The national debt is projected to hit 12 trillion this year, an increase of 6.052 trillion from the 5.948 trillion recorded in June 2016, just before President Duterte assumed office. The increase during the Duterte administration would be greater than the national debt accumulated from the Marcos to the Cory Aquino, Ramos, Estrada, Arroyo, and Noynoy Aquino administrations all together. While the imperative to fund our COVID response largely explains the bloating of the national debt, we must realize that the country may be heading in the direction of another crisis, a debt crisis. The gargantuan size of the debt is dwarfed by the magnitude of debt service, which will weigh down our children and future generations. In 2020, debt service payments amounted to 962 billion, or almost 1 trillion. As early as the first quarter of 2021 alone, we have already paid 522 billion. Our debt service payments are expected to be over 1 trillion annually. 6, problematic COVID-19 loans. A closer look at COVID loans is called for, inasmuch as they chiefly account for the ballooning of the national debt since 2020. Significantly, Finance Secretary Dominguez said the country plans to take out 3.03 trillion loans in 2021. This would aggravate the 2021 debt to DGP ratio, which was already 60.4% in March 2021. Given the inadequacy and obscurity of some COVID funding data, we call on the government to make a full accounting of the sources and uses of COVID funds, which President Duterte did not address in his SONA, particularly the delayed vaccination program. As expected, President Duterte blamed the pandemic, which he said stole everything, for the sluggish performance of the economy. While he is partly correct, he overlooked that A, the GDP growth has decelerated since his incumbency from 7.1% in 2016 to 6.1% in 2019, before the pandemic. B, while the Asia Pacific region was hit with equal ferocity by the pandemic, the other countries weathered the contagion admirably, but the Philippines rather feebly. C, he had a medical populist approach to the pandemic, like America's Donald Trump, Brazil's Bolsonaro, and India's Modi. He belittled the virus as a joke, downplayed the public health crisis, relied on a militaristic approach to the contagion, consequently preventing scientists and medical professionals from taking the lead, and touted his own bizarre solutions to the problem. State of education. While President Duterte drumbeats the completion of some mega infrastructure projects, he was ominously silent on the infrastructure of the mind, particularly basic education. Quality education is starting from primary school consideredly is the great equalizer, the ladder of social mobility, the beacon of hope. The parents cherish dreams, the children's abode fulfillment, and the guarantor of success. Although President Duterte correctly underscored the enactment of the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, the Duterte administration has utterly failed the pupils, the teachers, and basic education itself. The World Bank reported that of the 79 countries that participated in Program for International Student Assessment 2018, the Philippines ranked last in reading and second to last in science and math. Entrenched in International Mathematics and Science Study 2019, the Philippines rank in math and science was lower than in 2003. In the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Matrix 2019, among 6 participating ASEAN countries, the country never rose above 4th or 5th. While it is true that the World Bank published the results of the 3 international education assessments without prior notification to the Department of Education, a breach of protocol for which it has subsequently apologized, the Philippine government did not refute or contradict the validity and accuracy of the results. President Duterte previously attributed the Philippines' dismally low education ranking to the country's being poor saying, and I quote, "Mahirap lang talaga kasi tayo," unquote. This was a terribly embarrassing and errant excuse, which places the cart before the horse, because a Philippine statistics authority study shows that it is poor education that contributes to poverty, not the other way around. State of COVID-19 response. The acid test to President Duterte's leadership and ability to solve a serious national problem is the onslaught of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has wreaked havoc on the people's health and devastated the country's economy until now. President Duterte has failed the test and failed miserably. The contrived assessment of the president's apologies that his performance in confronting the pandemic is, quote, excellent, unquote, is belied by irrefutable data and impartial evaluations like the following. A. When the president delivered his SONA last year, the number of COVID-19 positive cases was 80,448, compared to yesterday's data of 1,548,175, which is 1,924% or close to 2,000% higher than it was a year ago. The number of deaths due to COVID on July 27, 2020 was 1,932. Yesterday, it stood at 27,224, which is 1,409% higher. While the numbers were expected to increase, the inordinate escalation is an indictment of the administration's ineffectiveness, to say the least. With respect to other ASEAN countries, the Philippines also fared poorly in fully vaccinating its citizens. Consider the following. Latest data show that Singapore placed first for having fully vaccinated a whopping 48% of its total population. Cambodia is second with 25%. Malaysia ranked third with 16%. Laos is fourth with 9.2%. Indonesia, with a population of 276.4 million, placed fifth for fully vaccinating an amazing 17.01 million people, or 6.2% of its population. Thailand placed sixth with 5.1%. Brunei ranked seventh with 4.8%. The Philippines placed a lowly 8 out of 10 nations, with a mere 4.6% fully inoculated, followed by troubled Myanmar at 9 with 2.8%. At 10th place is Vietnam, which has one of the lowest COVID-19 infection rates and deaths worldwide, thus making inoculation low in its priorities, with only 0.34%. Due to the anemic response of the Duterte administration to the contagion, Moody's Analytics projected that the Philippines would be dead last among 45 countries of the Asia-Pacific region to recover from the pandemic-induced recession in the last quarter of 2022. The global media outlets and foreign and local analysts and economists have similar assessments of the Philippine performance. Nikkei Asia's award-winning journalist William Pesek in on December 7, 2020, labeled the Duterte administration's a pusher government, or one led by a pseudo leader. Quote, Southeast Asia's weakest economic link, unquote, and its COVID response, quote, heavy-handed with the lockdowns, and, quote, far less competent with testing, contact tracing, and strategies to balance health risks with a reopening the economy. In February 2022, 2021, the Straits Times published an article entitled, quote, The Incompetence of the Philippines COVID-19 Response, which discusses how government's ineptitude led to the unforgivable delay in the vaccine rollout. On the domestic front, political science professor Richard Heydarian on January 11, 2021, wrote in Nikkei Asia an opinion piece entitled, quote, Duterte's COVID blunders will set the Philippines back generations, unquote, where he asserted that President Duterte has, quote, conveniently overlooked the vital importance of proactive leadership in times of crisis, unquote, and that his rejection of Western vaccines until the last minute and over dependence on vaccines from China, quote, has left the Philippines without quality vaccines until mid-2021, unquote. In business world, economist Andrew J. Masigan on April 25, 2021, wrote that, and I quote, the international press has declared President Duterte's government's COVID response as the most incompetent in the region, unquote. On July 13, 2021, CNN Philippines enumerated the following Duterte administration's broken COVID-19 promises. 1. Government, quote, missed its initial target of going back to normalcy by December 2020, unquote. 2. Government first targeted a contact tracing ratio of between 1 to 30 and 1 to 37. But after several months of missing the goal, it was lowered to 1:15. The Department of Health now admits that the average contact tracing ratio is 1:6 as of June. And 3, government undertook to attain herd immunity by the end of 2021, as it promised to inoculate 70 million Filipinos by December. But as of July 2021, it has only managed to fully vaccinate just over 5 million, far lower than its target of 70 million. Verily, it is not only the opposition saying that President Duterte's pandemic response is below par, but it is also the assessment of the world community. The state of the ICC investigation. President Duterte does not only continue to evade the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, ICC, but also defies the Supreme Court in its unanimous decision, which upheld the jurisdiction of ICC over the alleged offenses of the President and his men for crimes against humanity and other atrocities due to his brutal war on drugs. B. Rejected Duterte's posturing that the Philippine withdrawal on March 16, 2018 from the Rome Statute, which created the ICC, ousted the ICC's jurisdiction over him. C. Confirm that under Article 127 of the Rome Statute, the effectivity of a state's party's withdrawal is 1 year after the request of the notice of withdrawal is received by the United Nations General Secretary General, in which case the withdrawal of the Philippines became effective only on March 17, 2019. And D. Pronounced that consequently all covert offenses committed by Duterte and his cohorts from November 2011, when the Philippines became a state party to the Rome Statute, until March 16, 2019, fall under the jurisdiction of the ICC. And the Philippines is obligated to cooperate with the investigation of the ICC's prosecutor. Despite the categorical decision of the High Court, Malacanang insists that President Duterte will continue to defy the jurisdiction of the ICC. It dismissively added that anyway, the ICC cannot enforce its jurisdiction. However, the fact that the ICC has no enforcement arm aggravates the gravity of President Duterte's evasion from ICC's jurisdiction. Let me underscore that the absence of a policeman does not justify impunity. The state of freedom of the press. President Duterte's contempt of the Constitution is highlighted by his derogation of the freedom of the press, which is a component of the freedom of expression. In his SONA, he insisted that ABS-CBN cheated the government in unpaid taxes, despite clearances from the tax agencies. The Reporters Without Borders, RWB, ranked the Philippines a lowly 138 out of 180 countries in its 2021 World Press Freedom Index, where freedom of the press is impaired. It also included President Duterte among the 37 world leaders branded press freedom predators. The RWB documents the threatening attacks of President Duterte against the Philippine Daily Inquirer, which critically reported on the president's bloody war on drugs. The brazen denial of ABS-CBN's franchise renewal at the behest of President Duterte. The malicious criminal charges against Maria Ressa of Rappler was exposed President Duterte's fraud policies and the horrific employment of armies of trolls who harass and vilify journalists and critics of government online. The president has failed to appreciate that freedom of the speech and freedom of the press are the hallmarks of a democratic government. Paraphrasing the Supreme Court in Torpo versus People, without these freedoms, the errors of government would go unnoticed, the abuses unexposed, and official wrongdoings unrectified. The status of human rights. Right after the Second World War, the Philippines actively participated in the drafting of the United Nations Charter to help promote international peace and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The country has ratified 8 of the 9 core international human rights instruments, thus firming up the Philippines' commitment to protecting and promoting human rights. and holding the dignity and worth of the human person. Hence, the Philippines have been globally hailed. Such singular distinction has been obliterated by the current dismal human rights transgressions like extrajudicial killings, repressive policies, and harassments and summary executions of human rights defenders. XRDs. The Constitution provides that, and I quote, the state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect for human rights, unquote, thereby prohibiting the infliction of torture and other cruel, degrading, or inhuman punishment, more particularly the death penalty. Consequently, the Congress enacted Republic Act number 9346, prohibiting the imposition of the death penalty in 2006, with RA number 9745 or the Anti-Torture Act in 2009, and Republic Act 10353 or the Anti-Enforced or Involuntary Disappearance Act in 2012. What these laws prohibit, government defiantly practices, seemingly unmindful of the constitutional and statutory prescription of judicial killing or the death penalty. President Duterte instigates what is even worse, extrajudicial killings, throwing due process of law into the dustbin. It is truly lamentable that XRDs who condemn extrajudicial killings and assist victims and their families access justice are labeled cuddlers of criminals. Some of them have become victims of extrajudicial killings and other human rights violations themselves. State of corruption. An initial pillar of President Duterte's administration was the bold pronouncement to end official corruption. This pillar has crumbled with no less than President Duterte himself in a televised speech on September 29, 2020, saying he offered to resign because, quote, I was getting fed up. There's really no end to this corruption. It's really hard to stop it. Can you stop it? You cannot. There's no way, unquote. A month later, on October 27, 2020, he said, and I quote, this country continues to be plagued with corruption. Hindi humihina, lumalakas pang lalo, unquote. In his SONA, he repeated this defeatist attitude when he said that, quote, corruption is endemic in the government. You cannot stop corruption. Nobody can stop corruption unless we overturn the government completely. This is another major promise down the drain. Consequently, in the 2020 Corruption Perception Index, the Duterte administration has a score of 34, while the best performing countries, New Zealand and Denmark, both scored 88. In terms of ranking, the Philippines placed 115 out of 179 countries. Compared to other ASEAN countries, the Philippines ranked 7 out of 10 nations, lower than Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. State of the drug menace. It is an irony that President Duterte's centerpiece program, the elimination of the drug menace, is is waterproof. Instead of saving lives from the clutches of drug addiction, thousands of lives have been forfeited to his unabated, brutal war on drugs. The official tally is close to 7,000 deaths, but civil society and both local and international human rights groups count 30,000 extrajudicial killings. Whatever the horrific figure is, the fact is almost all the victims are impoverished and marginalized, whose deaths were mostly instigated by President Duterte's kill, kill, kill pronouncements, and where the corporate agents of the state were extended presidential shield and condonation. Although early in his administration, President Duterte has repeatedly admitted that his drug war has failed. The deadly anti-drug campaign continues to be waged violently. While every single nation in Southeast Asia faces a drug menace, only President Duterte is obsessed and possessed by it. Verily, President Duterte both has plundered in his centerpiece program of terminating the drug menace and failed to competently, adequately, and speedily confronting the pandemic crisis. A failure which is compounded by his lack of a pandemic roadmap to revive the people's health and restore the economy. Madam Speaker, distinguished colleagues, what President Duterte failed to accomplish or fulfill in 5 years, he cannot cram into completion in barely 6 months, considering the onset of the election fever in early 2022. The electorate's own SONA in the 2022 elections will be the popular clapback to President Duterte's final SONA. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, distinguished colleagues.